Detailing this Mclaren P1 was hands down the most complicated detail I have ever done. I hope you guys enjoyed that little cinematic intro, but let's jump directly into the detail itself and kind of get a little in-depth, and I'll explain to you why it was so complicated. So you'll see the car arrived dirty, like most of the cars that we work on do, but this car is not that dirty. So the low areas of the car are dirty, you know, the windshield is dirty, where the arrow is and where lots of things will get thrown off the tires, all those places are obviously dirty. But you know, the roof and parts of the doors are really not that dirty. The car did get tracked at, I believe it was at Autobahn Country Club, like within 24 hours of being purchased. So basically the customer owned the car for 24 hours, took it directly to a track. You know, that sounds about right when you buy a P1. So the front of the car was probably the worst, where it had lots of bugs and just grime from, you know, hitting bugs and stuff when you're going very quickly on a racetrack in summertime. So the worst part of the wash was cleaning the front of the car, and we'll kind of dive into that in a second, but the trick to that is basically just using multiple towels. The bottom of the diffuser basically looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a while. It's very low to the ground, it's very long, so it goes about a third of the way under the car, so it's just complicated to reach it. So I could have washed the car outside, but we ended up washing it inside with an IK foamer, and that's for a couple different reasons. The car itself was, like I just showed you, not terribly dirty, but the more important factor here was, and you have to take all factors into consideration when you're washing a $2 million car, was we were under a heat advisory in the Chicagoland area, so it was like 106, 107 degrees outside when this car arrived. They had just, you know, steamrolled down the highway at like 160 and were kind of having their fun, so the car itself was very hot. It's very hot outside. I literally wasn't able to film outside. I tried to film the car coming in, but there was so much like humidity that I couldn't, the camera would fog up anytime I took it out of the shop. So we just didn't have really a situation where I could wash the car outside without causing lots of problems, and those problems would have looked like really easy water spotting. So the car would have water spotted too easily if I had washed it outside because everything was so hot. And then it wasn't completely safe for me to be out there for, you know, 2 hours washing it in heat like that. So because the car wasn't that bad, because it didn't require clay bar or any iron X, because it was in such good shape, probably maybe because they had taken care of it for us by the previous owner, and the seller of the car maybe did some kind of detail before it was delivered. Bottom line, the car was in pretty good shape, so we could IK foam it indoors, regardless of doing it outside or inside. IK foaming a car is always an acceptable method of doing something. For the sake of videos, it's a little more cinematic to wash a car outside, so I wish we could have. But using 20 towels and an IK foamer will totally get the job done, and it will 100% be safe for the car. So you'll see here, I'm using pretty high pile 500 GSM towels. And the trick to this, guys, is, and you're going to see this if you're watching the video here, is look at the size of the panel that I'm working. I'm not working 30% of the car, right? I'm spraying the IK foamer on a section that's no larger than a foot by a foot, and I'm doing that small section with a towel. Then I'm using a new towel, or I'm flipping over to a clean side of that towel, and then I'm spraying another 2 foot or 1 foot area, and then I'm wiping that. Where you're going to have problems with an IK foamer is if you try and spray half the car down, then take one towel and rub the whole thing down. So what I'm doing here is arguably much safer than doing a wash outside, where I'm technically diluting this more by foam canning it, because that's running way more water into the soap, which makes it more runny, and I'm using just a wash pad, which means as that wash pad gets dirt in it, I'm more likely to rub that dirt back in. Whereas nearly every time I'm touching the car during this wash with the IK foamer, I am using a fresh side of a fresh new towel, and that means that every time the towel touches, it's touching for the first time and it's clean. Whereas the wash pad's repeatedly touching for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time, all the way through the entire wash. So I know there's some keyboard warriors out there who are going to see this and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you washed a $2 million car this way." But I love the IK foamer, and I did this specifically to show you guys how good the IK foamer system is. But it's all about process. So if you're using an IK foamer and then you do a bad process, well, yeah, it's not going to work out so good. But we can say the same thing about doing a wash with all of the best tools and then using terrible wash pads, process, and drying towels. So it's all got to come together in one uniform approach where you're, doing the right thing for the car. And in this particular situation, the right thing for the car was to do exactly what we did with an IK foamer and a climate-controlled shop. And you can see here, there's so many vents, and we're going to get into this later, and that's why the car is complicated to detail. There's so many places that water would have went, that would have water spotted, that I obviously could have fixed, but it would have made for so much extra work cleaning up and following my own tail, chasing my own tail to fix all those things. So this was the best way to do it, and as you'll see, it comes out very, very nice. And this is a great method to wash cars. Again, if you have, a condo or a townhome or something like that, and washing is difficult for you, the IK foamer is a great system. Just I recommend you always make sure you're using lots of towels. That's really the trick. So cleaning the diffuser is pretty straightforward. So the whole thing gets sprayed down with an IK foamer. I put a little extra in there. You can see I sprayed this a little more than the other places, but it was pretty obvious. I mean, this area of the car is highly exposed to dirt and debris and rocks and things that are going to fly up. And it's very, very long. It's deceptively long. It's hard to show. I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm like 6'2", so my arms are a little longer maybe than the average person's. I had to reach all the way in there. I mean, like big time. I had to reach all the way in there to get my hands back there, and I still didn't get it all the way, so I had to come back and do it one more time. I'm pretty sure on camera it looks pretty good, but I mean, that fin keeps going all the way under the car. So during a normal wash with a normal person who's getting paid even 30, 40 bucks, there's no way they're cleaning this diffuser the way I did. And that's okay. That's not necessarily expected from a detailer who's getting paid a relatively small amount of money to wash a car. The point is, this hadn't been washed in a long time, so I used like kind of semi-junk towels. This was a brand new towel, but it wasn't my 500 GSM towels, because I knew this towel was going to get totally trashed. So the trick here is rotating towels out and not too much pressure. We don't want to grind anything in. We're kind of letting all that soap and stuff do the trick for us, so it can kind of loosen everything out. Like I said, this hadn't been cleaned in so long that we were the first ones cleaning it probably in like 6 months or a year. The very tips of it you could see were kind of clean, but further back you could see all that grime that was left over. So the paint was in pretty good condition. I would say it was in very good condition for considering it's a $2 million car. I'm sure it's washed relatively often. Just because these cars aren't driven very much does not mean they are not washed often. Obviously we're dealing with some swirl marks, a little bit of hologramming, and honestly a small amount of oxidation, and some of that might be just from the heat coming off the engine after drives, because I doubt this car is being stored outside anywhere. It was definitely stored inside. But you'll see some oxidation on the paint on the red, and obviously the black stuff on the roof. This is the roof scoop. Obviously swirls on black stuff is always going to be easier to see. There's a sanding mark here, only sanding mark on the entire car. This is the driver door. I don't think I have an after shot of this, but that sanding mark does get fixed and corrected. Lots of weird little imperfections on this car, like things that could have been fixed from the factory but were not fixed, because this car clearly is a functional car, right? So all these vents, all these things are functional. The paint on this car is much thinner than a normal car's paint, so you can actually see like the carbon fiber weave through the paint, which is insane. So at first glance you might think it's a terrible paint job, but it's actually a pretty good paint job. It's just the paint is so thin you can actually see the carbon fiber weave, and I'll show that to you guys. Also, so much carbon fiber in the car. It's everywhere, guys. It's in the door jambs. It's on the interior of the car. This is matte carbon. They don't clear coat the carbon inside the car because they're trying to save weight. And you can see there's like fingerprints all over the place. So we're gonna have to fix that. The door sills are carbon fiber, obviously, and the backs of the seats are. The whole tub is carbon fiber, which I think we have some shots of later. So there's no, plastic or anything really in this car for the most part. It's similar to the Chiron in that respect. I think there might have been a few pieces of plastic in one or two places, but right there on the steering wheel, right? But I mean, the car is immensely complicated detail because of the level of carbon fiber. And here's another shot of that. The specs, that's all fingerprints, like the grease that's on your hands and stuff when you're touching and opening the doors. The way you fix that's interesting. It's not just as simple as wiping it back off. And because it's matte paint, or in this case it's just matte carbon, like any kind of grease fills in the matte and it ends up making it glossy, or in this case it looks like these kind of shiny marks. Here's a shot of oxidation on the back, and again, all that polishes out. So the bottom half is paint protection film, and it's just not oxidizing at the same rate as the paint is. There might be not a lot of UV inhibitors in this paint because the paint is so thin. That might be why the paint is oxidizing so quickly, because this car is not that old. But yeah, that's kind of the overall inspection on the car. So next up was the polishing phase. So we used every size polisher you can imagine: 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch. I used 6-inch pads, and then I used a lot of just my hand in places polishing things. So there's so much carbon fiber on this car, guys. It's so hard to explain it. I hope I captured it on camera well enough. It's everywhere, and the whole car is made out of it, and it's similar to the Chiron because the Chiron's all carbon fiber, but this is all exposed. So like you can see it, and that makes your mind kind of explode when you see all of the carbon fiber versus the Chiron's carbon fiber is, you know, not visible. So it's all covered up and you can't see the weave because they put all the extra work in to make sure that the weave is not visible on the Chiron. So they paint the car with a lot of paint and then they wet sand it to remove the orange peel. This car was not, like, they don't put a lot of time into the paint because it's about weight savings. So they don't want to do all that extra work and sand it and then spray it again and sand it and make, because you can see the carbon fiber weave. They obviously didn't want it to weigh a lot. So the paint job is important, but no way was it #1 priority like the Chiron, whereas way high priority. The paint had to be perfect. So interesting how the two cars are similar but very different in final approach. And so you guys have been seeing me use this 1-inch polisher a lot. I did so much work just with that 1-inch polisher. You'll see coming up there's some 3-inch polisher stuff, and it's just so time consuming because you're working on this exposed carbon fiber. We have very thin paint, so there's very small margin for error, and you can't polish too much because this car is going to be in our care for long term. So if anything ever needs to happen in the future, I can always take care of it. But if I put too much time into correcting something now, that means I'm removing too much paint, and that means in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I won't have as much paint to work with to polish. So this is definitely one of those situations where a good detailer is not concerned always about getting the detail perfect. He's concerned about how much paint do I have and how much can I conserve, because we want to make sure we have enough in the future. And that's kind of wrapping your head around a different problem than just what's happening with this detail today versus what's going to happen with this car in 15 years or 20 years or even 1 year, you know, because it might return often. Again, this is a kind of car where lots of people get in and out of it. Lots of people see it. This car is washed about once a week starting during this ownership of the new owner. So the car might not be driven a lot. It will be driven a lot for P1s, but it might not be driven a ton, but it's going to be used a lot. So people will be in and out of it, and it's going to get washed a lot. So paint health is a real conversation here. We want to make sure the car has enough paint for future visits. So because the car was in such good beginning shape, the cutting phase of this was really minimal. I really didn't remove very much paint, and then we spent a lot of time jeweling, and that's what you see on the 6-inch polisher with that black pad. That's the jeweling step. This really enhances gloss and clarity, but barely removes any paint. We did a cutting phase, but then most of the time was spent during the jeweling phase. This car does have paint protection film. There's film on the front of the car, and then it's kind of sprinkled around in other places, but it's pretty tasteful. So we did polish film, but most of the car was polished, meaning like real paint was polished. It wasn't just like polishing PPF, because remember, the Chiron was full PPF. So once that was all done, I pulled the car outside and did the wheels. I would normally not do it in this like in these steps, right? But because of the weather we were dealing with, which was considered extreme weather, it was just heat though, and humidity. The following day, we ended up pulling the car out because I did need to clean the wheels. The wheels were dirty, but they weren't filthy. The wheels on this car are coated in, I'll put it in an annotation, but they're coated in some crazy thing that's the world's most dense thing on the world. It's some crazy freaking thing they put on the carbon ceramic rotors. Point is, you can use Brake Buster on that. It is safe. You will see here that it's safe. We will continue to use Brake Buster on this car, and it will be safe. I know people ask us a lot about carbon ceramic rotors, and these are kind of extra special carbon ceramic rotors. There was no scrubbing needed, guys. The carbon ceramics barely make any dust. What you're seeing is really dust and stuff from the track day, and then a little bit of material from the brakes. I'll show you in a second. I'll prove it to you that all you need to do was spray brake buster and then rinse it, and then that was it. Some of you again are going to be freaking out and going, "Oh my God, Evan, you're spraying the whole car down with water. You just paint corrected it." That is accurate, but we are going to dry the car immediately afterwards, and then the entire car gets panel prepped because we're getting ready to do more paint correction after this step. I just pulled the car out during this step because we had time to do it because the weather was cooperating with us. And you'll see here I'm rubbing things and I'm showing you my hands. There's no dirt on my hands, guys, so that spray and rinse totally got the job done. So then we spray wet coat in the fenders because, once again, all the car is carbon fiber. There's no carpet in the fenders like on most cars. This is just a carbon fiber exposed fender. So putting some wet coat in there makes it a little hydrophobic and makes it stay a little bit cleaner, and it'll make maintenance in the future better. But back to the topic there. So the car came back inside after this for some jeweling polishing, and then it got prepped again with panel prep, and then it gets ceramic coated later. So I wasn't worried about the water here. The temperature and everything was cooperating, so I'm not worried about water spotting. And then I blow dry everything, and I'm going to wipe the whole car down again afterwards anyways, because we have to do that panel prep step. So this was the perfect time to pull it out. It was safe for the car. It was safe for me. It wasn't, like 110 and 90% humidity. And the wheels did need to be cleaned. I could have cleaned them inside, but I never like really flooding the shop with water. So as you can see, we obviously pulled the car out and cleaned it outside. And same thing on the back wheel. I think I show you again here. All it's needed is a spray and rinse. These rotors don't really dust a lot. What you end up seeing on carbon ceramics is usually just dust from like what you'd see on the paint, and then a very, very thin layer of actual like brake dust, and that stuff comes off probably regardless if I had used brake buster or not. I think it would have come off. But brake buster is nice. It helps loosen things. You will notice I spray a lot of brake buster here. I don't normally spray that much, but when I'm doing a touchless method, I will spray a lot. And then again, here you'll see in the back, I'm spraying wet coat for the same reason we sprayed it in the front. And then we do spray wet coat in the back diffuser, which you're going to see in 1 second. So this back diffuser area is way too tight for me to get my hands or any kind of ceramic block in there to actually coat it, and there's no way we were taking this off the car. That's just crazy. So spraying wet coat in here and then rinsing it for those that don't know, when you spray wet coat on something and then rinse it, that's how it bonds. So anything the water flow touches, it rinses that chemical over it, and it makes it hydrophobic and essentially ceramic coats it. If those areas aren't, going to be exposed to the sun, it'll last a really long time. So that's a great thing to do, and it was a great area for that product to work, and I would never be able to get in there, and I can reapply that during maintenance washes because we'll be taking care of this car long term, so we can make that last indefinitely. So after all that was done, we pulled the car back inside. So next up, we did all the interior cleaning. The inside of the car was in pretty good shape. It needed, an obvious vacuuming. I'm pretty sure there's a reason I didn't pull out the carpets. I'm editing this video now a week or two after doing the car. I'm pretty sure the carpets were glued to the floor, and that's why we did not remove them. This car is weird like that. There is no carpet on top of a carpet like in a normal car. The carpet you see is the floor. Underneath that is carbon fiber tub, and it was glued or Velcroed or something to that, and I didn't want to mess with it. As you can see, the carpets came out perfectly fine. They were not dirty enough to be, extravagantly pulled out and cleaned any crazy way. All of the leather was cleaned. As you can see in this car, it was pretty clean to begin with. And you'll see later in the video here, I touch the leather a lot after I clean it, and that's really because this kind of cleaning is about how the leather feels and not necessarily how it looks. So there's not really a before and after here because it's so minimal that there's not much to see in a before and after, but there is so much to feel. And the leather feels so much more original, it feels so much newer, and I'm sure the owner of the car, when he got into it, felt the seats and the leather, he realized there was something different about it. So that's really what this step is about. It's about making sure we get all the grease and grime from people and the sweat that goes into the seat, removing all of that. But because the car is not driven very much previously, it had low miles, and because it's obviously a hypercar and not something that's like a daily driver, there isn't much of a like, oh my God, look at that before and after kind of situation. It was much more about the feel, which unfortunately I really can't show you. But the process was to use Geon leather with a Detail Factory brush. We did not use the normal Geon brush because that's really for heavy lifting and a relatively aggressive method where, again, this car was pretty clean. So because of that, we use the Detail Factory brush because it's so non-abrasive and it's such a light touch. So, you know, anytime we can use a least aggressive step, especially on a $2 million car with seats that are probably almost impossible to replace, it's always better to do that versus maybe accidentally scratch something, or, you know, you can scratch leather. So this was the best method and it got the right results, and ultimately it really made the leather feel the way it was supposed to feel. So you can see on the doors here, there are a little leather grab piece where you would grab to close the door. That was really the only leather on the entire door. This section I'm doing right here, it's, I don't know how to describe it, but it's not carbon fiber and it's not leather, it's something else. So that section had some, you know, something on it, some kind of dirt, and all of it comes off. And you can kind of see on the sides of the door here that stuff I was mentioning before where it's like fingerprints and like grease from your hands or your arm. And so this is matte carbon fiber. So you don't want to add any gloss to matte carbon fiber. You can't polish it. You can't do anything like that. So the way you remove that is you use panel prep. And panel prep is alcohol. And because it's alcohol, it basically sucks everything off the surface. It's like a degreaser, and it removes all of those grease spots. So you can see here, this is the panel prep going on. You can see it literally evaporating as I'm using it, and you can see there's nothing left behind. And because it's like a degreaser, it's removing everything out, and it's only leaving matte because we don't want to put any gloss on there. So the entire inside was done with that. All of the matte surfaces, which is like the roof, the dash, all of that stuff was done in panel prep just to remove all those fingerprints. I'm sure over the times of people being in and out of this car, getting drives, they've held on for dear life and put their hands on the roof or something, and you know that's why there's some funny fingerprints on the roof and on the dash, and it's probably from people terrified holding on for dear life on the 1,000 horsepower P1. So the other aspect of the interior is all of the Alcantara, and there's not a whole lot of it, but it's on the doors, the dash, and the steering wheel. And I think we did a video recently on this, on that GT4, and it was the same process used here. So basically I'm using this brush. There's a little bit of Geon leather in that brush, so it's kind of going into the fibers, and then I like to brush it out real good, get any dirt or dust that's in there out, and then I tend to brush it one way just for aesthetically pleasing purposes. And if it's too damp or something, I go back over with a microfiber and suck off the moisture. I am not a fan of doing stripes and things. I think that's ridiculous. Mclaren did not deliver this P1 to the original owner with, you know, carpet stripes in it, so we don't do that kind of stuff. That's like this weird thing that detailers do to almost prove they did work on the car. We don't do that, okay? You know, carpets and Alcantara should be all brushed one way. It should look like it was the day you picked it up. That's what new looked like. New did not have stripes or any crazy design in it. Steering wheel was relatively interesting to clean. It was in pretty good shape, but you can see, especially in this shot, the left side of the steering wheel has a little bit of dirt buildup along kind of the edge, where it almost looks a little shiny, right? Whereas if you compare that to the top part of the steering wheel, that's more it looks more uniform. So the way we fixed that is, you can see here, we put a little bit of moisture into the Alcantara with the brush, but we're not soaking it by any means. And then I come back with the leather brush because we needed that abrasive step here to kind of loosen some things. So I end up spending a lot of time on that corner to really loosen things up and get it back to the way it should be looking. If you don't do that, it will continue to build, and then you get a problem where it doesn't look right. So after that, we ended up doing the ceramic coating. So the polishing and the ceramic coating phase are why this car is one of the most complicated cars in the world to detail. And it's because, guys, there are so many frickin' panels and like crazy vents and little gaps and things that you have to get into to take care of. And if you work the car like a normal car and try and do a full door, you'll get lost in the panel, you'll have high spots, you'll lose. It's so hard to see where the ceramic is going because there's so many curves. So I ended up having to do the car in like a million sections. So where I would normally do a car with a door, I would do a door in one section. That would be at maybe 2 sections if it's a big door. On this car, I did like this car's door, this P1's door, in like 14 sections or something like that, just to make sure that every area was being applied 100% perfectly with no high spots, with no issues, and that just the cure times were right. So where a normal car might take me, you know, an hour to an hour and a half to coat, this car took over 3 hours to coat, which is just ridiculous. I didn't think it was going to take that long. I was like, this was one of those cars where we did a dual layer coating. I put the first layer down, and then when I was done with that, I was so mentally exhausted, I had to take a break. I walked away for about an hour, and then I came back and did the second coat of EXO on top. Because detailing a car like this takes a lot of skill. It's a very complex detail. But the thing that people don't talk about is, you know, there's a lot of mental fortitude that goes into a detail like this. You got to have a mental conversation with yourself about, I'm doing this car and I'm going to do it perfectly. And you have to really know when to walk away if you need to take a second, and like, cause you can get a little lost in it and you can start kind of not doing a good job. And that's why some of the details that I do take so long, because some of the best detail you ever get will never be one that happens quickly. So you need to take your time, and that's why our details take a little longer than other people's details. Now, another reason that ceramic job took so long is all of the doors are made out of carbon fiber, and there's a lot of gloss carbon that I can coat. So all of the door jambs, all of the upper part of the door here is done. Like the upper seam where it's like where the door hinge is, the door jamb here, all of it's carbon fiber, and again, all of it's being coated in individual small sections, because if I try and do a big section, it's going to go terribly. So like you can see part of the tub here. So the bottom half is the carbon fiber tub, and the upper half is more traditional carbon fiber. That lower half there is actually part of the carbon fiber tub, and it's actually a vent. I don't even know if the Hamilton collection knows about that. That's actually a vent that channels into the bottom of the car. So this is coated as a functional thing for me, because dirt, debris, everything goes in there. That's like a functional vent. Here's the inside of the door getting coated. Like all of this stuff, there's more paint on this car than there probably is an F-150 in terms of when you break down all the individual vents, because a door on a normal car is just one panel, but on this car it's like 12 panels. So this is all, like this section here is part of that vent that I just showed you, the double carbon fiber on the lower half. That's the vent that feeds through the door into another radiator on the bottom. So all of this stuff needed to be coated. All of it, some of these areas were polished by hand. I didn't record that because there was literally so much time going into this detail and filming that we just couldn't film everything. But multiple things you're seeing here were polished by hand, because we really couldn't risk using a machine and missing something, and you really can't mask some of this stuff because it's just not feasible. I mean, the areas you're working are so small. So the difficulty of this detail is very, very high. The Chiron was a cool detail. It was a fun car to work on. It is complicated, obviously a complicated car to work on. This P1 was 3 or 4 times more complicated than that. I mean, it's not even from the same universe as the Chiron in terms of complexity and the amount of time I had to put in for polishing and paint correction, or for polishing and for ceramic coating. Alrighty guys, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we got the point across that this car was an insane job to work on. So I'll see you guys again soon in another crazy detail. We do have more hypercars coming, so again, this is just the beginning. And guys, I've mentioned this before in the past, if you're into hypercar automotive detailing and these cool cinematic shots, then I think we have a monopoly on it, because we have so many cool videos and cars and projects planned. So if you are not subscribed to the Status Detail YouTube page, guys, now is definitely the time to jump aboard and kind of watch what's coming, because we have some crazy stuff coming. And do not forget, also check out the Hamilton collection on all forms of social media. They're pretty famous now on TikTok. They have a YouTube channel as well. I will link everything below. Definitely give Hamilton Collection a follow on social and check out what these guys are doing, because their car collection is totally awesome. Alrighty guys, that's it for me. See you soon.